Hi, my name is David Herring from Alpine Access Australia, and this is the latest instalment from a series of interviews I'm doing for Arc'teryx. This week I had a chat with Agata Imielska, who has a climate science background and is a senior climatologist with the Bureau of Meteorology and has been for the last 12 years. She has contributed to research on climate extremes and the development of seasonal outlooks, and is passionate about reducing the impact of weather and climate events. She's also a passionate skier and has been entering into the backcountry in the last couple of years, and this is my chat with her. Welcome, Aggie.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
No worries, always good to see you. Just give us a brief history. You Polish background? Were you born in Poland? How did you end up in Australia?
Yes, I was born in Poland and came over here just before I turned 11 with my family. Probably a pretty classic immigrant story. Our parents, thought of a better life for their kids, and my grandfather had one of his sisters that immigrated quite a few decades ago, and went to visit her and came back, and that's where my parents got the idea of coming to Australia. And so we ended up here, and definitely don't look back. It's been fantastic.
Well, all good for us, I'd suggest. Where did the weather and the climate science, where did that all start, and where did you study and go to school and things like that?
It's a pretty kind of niche area. So I think not a lot of people sort of wake up and go like, being a primary school kid being like, I want to be a climatologist. But I've always been really good at maths, and I spent quite a lot of time thinking about how I could utilize those skills in particular and do something that contributed positively to the planet and the world. And so I sort of settled on pursuing environmental science, and that saw me apply for a Bachelor of Science in Physical Geography. I went to Victoria University and did quite a well-rounded degree, which at the start saw you doing a bunch of different subjects. So you did things from geomorphology, so how a landscape is formed and shaped by its various factors. Weather, of course, is one of them, and so we did studies on atmospheric science, and there was a lot of discussion around climate change while I was doing my degree, and so that sort of started to pull me more and more towards climate and climate science, and that's the rest is kind of history, really. I ended up doing more of that and doing some research, and then an opportunity at the Bureau came up, and I was straight in there.
So do you get at dinner parties, do you get asked all the weather questions, a bit like a doctor gets asked all the medical questions?
Oh, absolutely. But it usually starts with blaming me for the weather forecast. That one time someone got caught out in the rain because, they might not have even checked the weather forecast, but, it's usually, you still cop the blame. So that's always quite funny. So it really makes you sort of, your skin thickens up. If you work for the Bureau of Meteorology, you have to have a bit of a thick skin and just a lot of humility as well. Like we know when we haven't got it right.
So should we take any notice of forecasts more than 3 days out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's when people do complain about the weather forecast, it's generally a really good foray into just that. It's like, how do you actually use your weather information? Yeah. It's not flawless. There is no such thing as like 100% correct all of the time. No human, is able to do that. But weather forecasts have become incredibly more accurate than they have, been decades ago. But I generally tell people that it's all of this information is useful for planning, and the closer you get, the more accurate it gets. And so ideally you want to be able to sort of check in with that information, think about what your plans are. Yeah. You can even think about it from a season out. For example, you know, we're pumped about the snow season. We know when that is. We know the rough climatology of when the good, you know, snow months are in Australia. So you know you've got that window where you know there'll be some good conditions. But of course, as we get closer to it, we might see some particular climate drivers that are being active. Like right now, we've got a positive southern annular mode, which means that we're not seeing quite as many cold fronts moving through, and as a result, not really that much snow around, unfortunately.
So we want that to be negative?
Yes, yeah, during winter and for the snow, a negative SAM is great. It means that the belt of westerly winds that usually sits to the south of Australia moves over us, and it just lets those cold fronts penetrate further into southern Australia, and just the more of them sort of come through, the more the likelihood that, you know, some of them might tap into some moisture and bring some snow.
Yeah. So the way I see it, you know, the highs as that moves north and south, you know, when it's letting the highs dominate over the mainland at the moment, and yeah, I can't see anything coming, but hopefully. And you know, one of the reasons we love bomb is that you know, you're not influenced by your sponsors, and you know, some of the other stuff we hear, you know, people talking up the season. I just don't get it this far out. But anyway, so I'm going to ask a bit more about the southern annular mode and the Indian Ocean dipole. Maybe you could just give us a bit of a rundown for those that don't know about those influences, and you know, other things that really, you know, where's our weather come from, and how are these things impacting on our winter?
Yeah, absolutely. So Australia, being an island surrounded by ocean, is really strongly affected by what happens in both the Indian and the Pacific Ocean. Very common and probably best known climate driver is ENSO, which has two phases, El Nino and La Nina. But we're going to focus on the Indian Ocean that actually has quite a similar kind of climate phenomena in that particular ocean basin. So there's changes in ocean temperatures in different parts of the Indian Ocean. Yep. So that then tends to drive particular wind circulation, and it can mean that we either get more moisture and more rainfall coming to Australia, or potentially less. And that's usually associated with these different phases of what we call the Indian Ocean dipole, or IOD, which is the positive and the negative phase. Negative bringing wet conditions over large parts of Australia, and the positive meaning that we can have some dry conditions. And just as an example, we've had a horrific bushfire season, and we had, you know, Australia being in drought for 3 years, but we saw very, very dry conditions towards the end of spring and through December last year. That really was one of the big factors, and that was driven by one of the strongest positive IODs we've had on record. So just a good example of, you know, how important these climate drivers are for Australia.
Yeah. So what's the MJO, is it?
Yeah, the Madden-Julian oscillation.
Oh, there we go.
Looking up all of these different climate drivers, Dave. It's awesome. That's a tropical one.
I'm a professional.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't expect any less. So yeah, the MJO is so it's more important for the tropics, but as anything to do with the environment, all of these things interact and are interconnected. So it can have flow-on effects for weather that we do see across Australia, but really its dominant influence is in the tropics. So yeah, the MJO is a burst of convection, of sort of cloudiness, you can think about it that way, that when it's active will move from west to east, circling the tropics. And that can often be a trigger for tropical cyclone development. So that's why it's quite important in that sort of sense. So, and I realized I didn't talk about SAM. So at the other end of the globe, down at the poles, we've got the southern annular mode, so SAM. this climate driver is affectionately called. And that relates to what we talked about before. You've got this belt of westerly winds that circle around the southern pole, and we see them either contract towards the poles or move over closer over those sort of southern parts of Australia.
Yeah.
And that can modulate the type of weather that we see. Its impacts really vary a lot more from season to season. So a positive and a negative SAM in summer means something quite different in terms of impacts compared to winter, for example.
Yeah, cool. So, when I was younger and looking to the mountains and wondering whether to get in the car and drive up for the weekend, we used to look at Adelaide. Is it raining and 14 degrees? It seems a little bit different these days. Now I'm kind of looking to the northwest and wondering if we're going to get, prefrontal rain. Has it always been like that? Is this new? What's changed from what's climate change bringing that's making a difference to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Climate change is absolutely having an impact and plays a role. And I'll touch on that shortly. But I think the other thing is like anything you sort of start to interact with. Everyone goes on their own sort of journey with weather outlooks and weather information. You really see the value of it. You start to engage more. I think for anybody that especially goes out into an alpine environment, has an acute understanding of how important it is. And that just drives the demand for more information, for more accuracy, to get as much out of it. And you're watching it so closely. Yeah. And so I think there's also, that journey that you go on, you sort of you notice different things to what you would have, but it's also very hard to relate because, back in the day, the impacts of climate change, were not as necessarily, present. But obviously those impacts have been strengthening as the amount of greenhouse gases have been pumped into the atmosphere in that time. But yeah, it's also that perception, and also weather forecasts, weren't as accurate, several decades ago. So it is that thing. There's a few factors there when you sort of reflect on, your own personal experience. But coming back to climate change, there'd be no surprise. Climate change means that we've seen a rise in global temperatures. It means that Australia has seen an increase in the number, intensity, and duration of heat waves. So the heat waves, we're seeing them happening more often, lasting longer, and being hotter. So, and I mean, that's a pretty kind of well-known impact of climate change. But for us as well in Australia, it's also changing some of our rainfall patterns, especially during the cool part of the season and over southern Australia. So we have seen a reduction in rainfall, particularly in the last 20 years. And with that, especially given that Australia does have these swings between droughts and floods, that rainfall reduction really, it does exacerbate conditions. Again, looking at the recent drought, the recent bushfire season we've had, these are the sorts of things that do contribute to exacerbating what were already, potentially dry conditions. Yeah.
So what's it mean for the snow line, the level of snow, the freeze level, these things that we look at on a daily basis when we're going out into the backcountry? What's the future with climate change? What are we looking out for?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because there's different dynamics when it comes to snow versus rainfall. So you are looking at, temperature and that sort of moisture and rain-bearing systems coming through. So I think it'd be no surprise for anybody that to know that snow accumulations in a given season have been reducing, and that is associated with climate change. But both the temperature increase, with warmer temperatures, it means that snow can melt faster or not stick around for as long, particularly heading into spring
Yep.
But also we have seen a trend in a reduction of low to moderate snowfalls. So again, not sort of seeing those, again, thinking about that, rainfall trend, but also that sort of, positive SAM type situation where you're not, you've got something that really kind of doesn't, is suppressing those sort of classic winter systems being able to move through.
Yep.
But interestingly, there hasn't been a trend in the really big snow events. So those really strong cold fronts that can bring a big dump of snow, we haven't really seen a change in the frequency of those particular events, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, you and I were talking about this last year, and we were probably anticipating that change, though, where, we did have some very big snowfalls last year, and there were, I think the Abbey danger rating went into high for one of only a handful of times ever. And we're kind of anticipating that, but that's probably good news for most people going into the backcountry. Can we talk a bit about where we get our information from? And there's a lot of models out there. There's a lot of places we go, from the bomb to Windy, the more commercial sites like Snow Forecast and so on. What's your go-to? What do you recommend for recreationalists going out into the backcountry?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to spruce the bomb here. You have to at least. You don't have to look at bomb exclusively, but please look at the bomb. The weather forecasters are great. They do put a lot of.
Everyone loves the bomb. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm sure everybody looks at that information there. But I think that the key thing is to look at a range of sources. So basically, when it comes to a weather forecast or weather information, they do all originate from some kind of weather model, numerical weather prediction model, if you want to use the sort of fancy name. And, this is what our forecasters use at when they're at work. They look at a range of models, whether that's the ECMWF or EC for short, or the Australian model Access, or whether it's, the UK model, the Japanese model, the model from the US. But basically, by being able to look at these different models, if you're that sort of high-end user where you really want to be able to understand what's going on, you really want to hone in on the detail, being able to see what each of these models forecast can be an incredibly powerful thing. And you can get that from Windy, for example, that gives you EC and GFS from memory. But if you the more of those sort of model outputs you look at for that information, you start to see similarities and potentially differences. And you can have a lot more confidence in the weather forecast and the conditions we might expect to see if all of those models are agreeing. Because if they're forecasting similar things, you can have a lot more confidence in that, that there's that sort of consistency and consensus between the models. But if they're disagreeing, then that's something that you need to pay very close attention to, because that means that there might be something going on. Things might be just a bit more dynamic, and it might, change things quite significantly. But, having said that, I think all of us have had the situation of being caught out, and especially with conditions being so changeable in the Alpines. So yeah, it's really good to be aware of the timing of a change, that can affect you. You don't want to be cutting things too short. And that intensity as well. But that's the key thing for me. If you're really just using one single forecast and you don't necessarily know what went into that and what the inputs were, then you might lose out on some of that detail.
So I've always said 5 minutes is a long time in the Australian backcountry in the middle of winter. So these different models, what is it that makes them different? Where are they getting their input from and their observations to make up? How does it all work?
That's a Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, just briefly explain complicated
We'll get
models.
timed
Yeah,
out here.
I know, I know. Well, but so basically, that there's broad similarities. They both have maths and physics behind them in
Yeah,
what our best understanding is of how things work.
yeah,
We also have global observations that we feed in from satellites, ocean buoys,
yeah.
weather observations across the globe. So a lot of that is similar. There's differences in terms of some of the particular developments that each of these models has. So there'll be those sort of slight differences. One country research team might have just you know, found out or founded a better way of representing, tropical convection or some kind of interconnection,
Yeah.
teleconnections in terms of something else. So there'll be those sort of differences as those developments happen.
Mm.
But the other thing is as well is that they'll have different initialization processes. So basically they get their observations, they see what's happening around the globe right now, and then they get initialized and basically start producing weather. And those sort of the way that works in the models can be different and produce different results as well.
Yeah. And look, it's just the accuracy now is incredible. It's so good. I love Windy. I love being able to put three different models up if you press comparison and you get three on the screen at the same time. Fantastic. Absolute gold. So if we were looking, for instance, for a combination of cold air and moisture, where are we going to find that?
Where would we find cold air and moisture?
Yeah, in a model, when we're researching the weather for the coming up. If we're
Yeah,
looking at
yep.
what's coming.
Yep, absolutely. So I think this is where things like Windy are a lot more powerful, because you get to click through a bunch of
Yeah,
different layers
yeah,
and see
fantastic.
all of that, and seeing also what's happening at the surface versus above.
Yep,
So that's something that I would look at if you're interested in that sort of especially snow bearing sort of system.
yep,
So you can sort of look through a rainfall forecast will, obviously tell you something about the moisture that's coming through.
yep.
And you can look at that, actually looking at some of the moisture levels, but
Mm,
then looking at temperature, but not just at the surface, but looking at what's happening like up in the higher levels. If you've got a strong cold air pool in the upper layers of the atmosphere, that is, generally a really good sign that there's going to
yeah,
be
that's right.
enough in there to convert that moisture to snow. And then you just
So
need the trigger mechanism.
I'm going to show off again with my research. Vorticity. Is that where,
Vorticity, yeah.
hey, is that where sort of the instabilities, wind shear and in the upper levels? Am I talking the right?
Yes, you are. Yeah. Yeah, it's trying to get really, really technical. Yep. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like there's, there's different representations, different sort of, how would I say, like almost variables that we can use to basically see the instability, but also, whether there's enough in the sort of broader weather
Yeah,
setup on the day that might generate some pretty significant or potentially, damaging weather systems. So, things like potential vorticity, so the potential for systems to be really spun up and have that kind of
yeah,
energy there present, can give you a good indication whether things are looking a bit more volatile than, than compared to, when there's a big, burly, high pressure system over most of Australia and not a lot's happening, like we've had and
yeah,
been seeing more recently.
yeah. Okay, so it's just a personal, something I'm curious about. I wrote a piece for the Alpine Access Facebook page the other day, and someone came back with a comment about air pressure. And do you take it into account when you're talking about avalanches and looking for avalanche danger? On a broader scale, the weather and the impact on different levels of atmospheric pressure and stuff. How's that working?
Yeah. I mean, that is probably one of the most fundamental
Yep.
aspects of weather. you know, really what the most simple way of looking at weather is that it's our atmosphere trying to find an equilibrium. So there's areas that are really hot or really cold, or areas of high pressure and low pressure. And as the earth is spinning around and all of this is swirling around, it's trying to equalize. And that creates these you know, strong pressure gradients. And when we see those, those are exactly the sorts of things that we're looking for, because that creates, you know, strengthened wind flows. That is what, you know, drives things like cold fronts moving across again. So absolutely, and it's absolutely about, you know, not just what's happening at the surface, but what's happening all the way at the top, and how that interacts. You know, really three-dimensional, you know, connection between what's happening in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Did BOM actually have any tutorials or anything that people can look at and learn some of this stuff and get a better perspective on?
Yeah, oh, that's a really great question. There's lots of information, and I would definitely recommend looking at some of our videos that we've got online. There's a bunch of really good ones. Ask BOM, which have little, you know, 2-3 minute blurbs about whether it's snow forecasts or, you know, how we name tropical cyclones. They're quite good. Off the top of my head, I don't think we have one super specific and detailed on snow conditions, but there is definitely quite a bit of information out there. So maybe I need to put in, you know, a word. I think that would be a really great addition.
That would be. We're getting you going on a lot of things up there. So, if you experienced extreme weather yourself, have you, you know, what's?
Oh, have I? Oh, yeah. Look, so my partner and I both keen. Well, I'm a skier. He's a snowboarder, and we camp when we go down, and we're pretty. We're really keen to get into backcountry, which we have done, which has been absolutely fantastic. But as part of our prep, you know, we were camping, regardless of what the conditions were, by our car. We thought that would be, you know, good sort of test of our skills. And there was, you know, one particular night that stands out in my mind where we were setting up quite a big tent with the expectation of our friends arriving, and it was. We were running a bit late, and we arrived just as a big cold front was moving through Cosi National Park, and we were trying to set up this huge tent that ended up being just picked up by this strong wind of gust. It was so strong that it was ripped out of my partner's hand. I was on the other end, and it hit me and literally knocked me off my feet before it ended up in the trees. And ended up getting a nice huge rip in the tent. So we had some really good experience figuring out how to deal with that. But that tent since then has also been crushed by a very heavy snowfall too. So it's not made it through.
So
I've had both.
You back to Island Bend this year?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we go down and camp at Island Bend. So we're looking forward. We've made a few bookings. We're going to put our trip intentions in. We're going to make sure that we've done all our COVID safe activities to still be able to enjoy the season.
It's a different year, isn't it? It's going to be I'm worried about car parking, but anyway, we'll see where that goes. So I know you're involved with the Mountain Sports Collective as well. You've come on board there. For those that don't know, that's a volunteer organisation that's trying to improve safety and access to information for backcountry users. Really worth getting on and having a look at. What's your role there?
So I am an assistant director of New South Wales. So basically helping out our New South Wales director, Peter, who I think you know quite well.
Oh, I know Peter.
You might spend quite a bit of time together. So it's been really fantastic working with Peter, but also with the broader Mountain Sports Collective crew. Obviously, we've got New South Wales and Victoria, but we all come together and pretty regularly to try and improve things, the information, and really, I think for me, it's been, as someone that's literally in their, just as their first year in the backcountry under their belt, I've been thinking a lot about, what that experience is like, and all of the different things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And how to help people be able to really get the most out of a beautiful alpine country that we've got in Australia.
Yeah. Look, it's going ahead at leaps and bounds, that organisation this year, and you should be all should be proud of your work. I can see I'm going very dark here. I should have turned the light on before we started. But so just to finish up, really huge thanks for having a chat. What do you do outside of the winters? What do you do in summer? You in mountain biking? What do you do to keep fit?
Yeah, so we're pretty avid hikers and campers, which we unfortunately haven't had much opportunity to do with the bushfire season and everything. So we're absolutely just so stoked that things are improving and restrictions are lifting. We did our first camp on the long weekend. Got to go out to regional New South Wales. It's fantastic.
We were out the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, that's our favorite way of being, getting fit, being out there, really being able to enjoy nature and using our own, body, our own sort of steam to get it to places and see some really beautiful country. So that's top of our list, really.
Excellent. I probably should ask you if I know you haven't been touring for a long time, but if you had any, I ask everybody this, any Abbey experiences or, oh shit, I'm out of my depth moments yet?
Oh, look, I think more the latter. I haven't had any Avi experiences myself, and count myself fortunate. Knock on wood.
Yep.
We've done the course with Alpine Access on just avalanche safety, and that's been just so fantastic. And it was especially great to find out about all of the other risks. I think that for me was like such a huge learning curve. Avalanches just seem like this quite it's like the poster child of safety because it's so it can be so gnarly, but then you start hearing about ice and the need for crampons, and do you carry an ice axe with you, and the list of equipment that we needed just started sort of expanding, but certainly just being out there and sort of the first couple of trips, well, we didn't do too much, but just little fiddly bits, didn't do up my bindings properly, and my ski just dislodged and almost slid off and almost ended up in the lake. So it's just that thing of just being like there's those sorts of things, and as well as that experience of again being in a group and being able to speak up when you're that's right. I've definitely appreciated that.
It's not a shame it's called avalanche skills training because it's not only about avalanches, especially in Australia. There's so many more hazards that we really have to keep an eye on out there. But before I disappear into the darkness of thanks again, Agata, and always really good to have a chat, and everybody just appreciate what BOM has to offer, and get on there and find your way around it, and take full advantage of everything that's on offer. Okay, Aggie, thank you. We'll see you again.
Thanks, Dave. All the best.
Bye.